Alright YouTube, so today I thought I would share with you my clone of an XM177E2. The XM177E2 was a carbine that was developed in the late 1960s for use during the Vietnam War. The features of the XM177E2 were an aluminum collapsible stock. These were two position. They had the closed position, which it is in now, and then also in the open position. So there was no variations. There was no essential adjustments. Either the stock was closed for essentially like transport or all the way open. So, and of course today's stocks are polymer. These older ones were made out of aluminum, and they gave them like a black, kind of like a vinyl or acetate coating. So it kind of made it maybe a little more user friendly instead of the raw metal. The XM177E2 would have an A1 style pistol grip. As you can see here, this is an original with, you can kind of see there that there are like fibers in the grip itself, probably made out of like something like a fiberglass or a bakelite material for its time. The newer ones and even later M16A1s would have more of a polymer grip, even with the same pattern. So this is kind of an earlier grip. And then of course the XM177E2 would have a teardrop style forward assist, and of course the forward assist boss in the upper receiver itself. It would have an A1 style upper receiver and A1 sights. The A1 sights are windage adjustable. You could use a tool or a bullet tip essentially to turn this to change your windage side to side to adjust your sights. The original XM177E2s would have a full fence, and that fence was to guard against inadvertently dropping or releasing a magazine. And typically in the late 1960s, the XM177E2 would be used with a 20 round magazine. However, some prototypical 30 round magazines, I believe, were around in the 1960s. There was not many of them, and they were trying to get them to work and function correctly. Basically in a development phase. You wouldn't see a proliferation of 30 round magazines until the early 1970s for use in the Vietnam War. So as the war winded down, you would see more 30 round magazines in use. The XM177E2 was the first variant of the M16 that would have the tapered delta ring here. So the earlier versions would have just a straight delta ring, and the tapered would let you get a better grip on the ring itself to release the handguards. So, and on this carbine variant, you would have a set of small tubular handguards, and of course those small round handguards would eventually become A2 handguards on a full-size A2 rifle. So the A2 has basically a double length, a little bit larger diameter set of these style of handguards. So some of the things on this old XM177E2 were used later on in later models of the M16 rifle. Of course, once again, this is a clone. This is a civilian legal clone, and this is a semi-automatic AR-15 lower receiver used for this build. Anyhow, moving on here. The original XM177E2s would have something called a moderator up front that would essentially change the sound or the report of the rifle. And then of course the real variants would also have something, this piece here, it was like a metal washer, if you will, and that little groove there would facilitate the use of an XM148 grenade launcher from under the carbine itself, or the mounting essentially of that unit. The XM148 would go on to become the M203 grenade launching platform that was used on essentially mostly the M16A1 rifle. Of course, since this is a clone, this is your normal regular flash hider that has been pinned and welded to be permanently attached to the 11.5 inch barrel, which makes it over 16 inches in legal length. So anyhow, the XM177E2 would have a 11.5 inch barrel. The XM, little side note here, the XMs that were left in inventory in the US military, there wasn't a whole lot around, but the ones that were left, they would eventually remove the moderator, and they would attach a normal flash hider. So some of the pictures that came out from the early 1980s, with some of these old XM carbines that were laying around, they went ahead and put on a regular flash hider, if you will. Probably an M16A1 style bird cage. So we'll go ahead and flip it over right now. Another thing to notice on this, back in the old days, before the castle nut, they had something called the spanner nut. They would use a spanner wrench to essentially torque this buffer retention plate down and to torque the buffer to lower. And if you notice, there's a little slot there. They would stake a piece of metal. They would essentially hit it with a chisel or a screwdriver or something like that, and that would push out a piece of metal into this buffer retainer ring here, and that would keep that from unscrewing. Later on, as technology moved forward, they would use a castle nut that had multiple attachment points, and you can get a better, essentially a better attachment with a tool, and probably get more torque on that castle nut to attach the or to torque that plate down, keep the buffer from unscrewing. So they still would, later on in other carbines, they could still stake the castle nut to the buffer retainer plate there. However, it probably wasn't needed as bad as back when they were just using the spanner nut. Anyways, a little bit of a side note there. If you notice on this carbine, this has an older style selector lever, essentially. So being that this is just an AR-15, it is semi-automatic. There's only a fire and safe. Originals would be marked with an auto here, and this of course has the kind of the shorter tang or shorter lever here. Many of the modern levers go all the way up to here, and the older ones would have kind of this little open space here. So this is kind of an older semi-automatic lever. Have a close-up of the delta ring, carbine handguards, and of course on the XM177-E2 they would mill off the bayonet lug. Since the bayonet lug could not fit over the moderator on the military style, or the essentially the real XM177-E2s, they could not mount a bayonet, so they went ahead and did away with that. And since weight was a big concern back in the Vietnam days, some of these guys using these carbines that were in special operations, they would take a huge amount of ammunition with them going into the jungle, because they were essentially kind of out there by themselves. And when they got into a big gunfight or firefight, if you will, they were their own backup. So every ounce of weight mattered. So this was kind of a little bit of an easier, more effective weapon to carry than a full-size M16A1. One of the differences, since this is a clone, it's not 100% accurate, so the actual real XM177-E2s would have a lightweight profile barrel, which was kind of a sign of the times in the late 1960s. This clone has a modern, larger diameter barrel there. However, under the handguards is still lightweight. So this is not 100% accurate clone as far as every piece and part. However, it's good enough for me, I guess. So another thing I wanted to cover real quick here, the more accurate clones will have a true kind of a lighter weight boss through here. This is more of a modern lower receiver AR-15, of course, and they've kind of increased the size of the casting, or rather the forging here, and that lends to a little bit of strength. However, some of the earlier M16A1 style lowers or M16 lowers that they made essentially the carbine out of, they would have a little more exposed area here. So just kind of a side note there. And of course the tick mark on the selector or the safety lever didn't exist for a long time, so that's something that got added later on. I'm not sure if they had that, probably not during that era. But as you can see, kind of a neat throwback. And I always thought they were a cool looking little carbine. So oftentimes these would be referred to as kind of a commando carbine. I'm not sure if that's technically accurate. However, I don't think for a long time before the days of the internet, it wasn't easy to research different models. Or essentially, that information really didn't exist unless you found it in a book form or some government document, if you will, somewhere. So a lot of it was hearsay. A lot of things got nicknames. Sometimes they were inaccurate names or nomenclature. So anyhow, hope you enjoyed the video. I enjoyed sharing this little carbine, this little clone with you, and I hope to talk to you again. And please like and subscribe, and we'll see you later.